The Connor Hellebuyck trade saga just continues to add more and more layers of complexity. Brady Tkachuk to Florida. Who else will step up to answer the call?
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you for joining us on this Monday evening episode. Holy Mother of Mercy, what a weekend. And obviously a lot of you are probably in a lot of mixed emotions right now. The Connor Hellebuyck trade appears to be progressing along, but not to who a lot of us thought. The Florida Panthers seemed like the easiest destination to connect him to. But thanks to a Brady Tkachuk deal that sort of popped up somewhat out of nowhere, but also it does kind of track with reuniting the brothers, there have been some new turns to the tail, and things are moving in a different direction than some of us thought. But those of us who understood that this was going to be a multi-team stare down until somebody blinked first knew that it might not actually be the Panthers. That just made the most sense. So who's going to end up with Hellebuyck? We'll talk about all of the possibilities and what we should be looking forward to in the week ahead. Before we do, though, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, of course, is the World Cup, and the biggest stage in soccer is here. Let there be goals on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com to get started now. Like I said, over the weekend, the Brady Tkachuk deal kind of broke, and it was a little bit out of left field. The Tkachuk deal obviously materialized out of the Panthers looking to make a big splash, and we know that they are one of those teams that swings. And I think Florida was pretty hot to trot for Hellebuyck. They've been checking in on him, and I think what ended up happening was the Jets said Lundell or bust, and the Panthers were like, okay. They had a number of other deals that they were sort of cooking because it's the Panthers. That is kind of how they operate. One of these other deals that evidently they've been percolating has been the Brady Tkachuk deal. You know, reuniting the Tkachuk brothers. I'm sure Matthew was in Zito's ear asking him to get this done. And the Senators were kind of in a different position, right? Ottawa didn't necessarily need a top center in Lundell. And Lundell himself, you know, he might not be like the world's most elite #1 center, but he is a pretty good middle to top six guy. That said, the Sens were not in a position to where they had to have him. And instead, they opted for a package of a bunch of futures, multiple first-round picks, including 9th overall and 25th overall. They ended up getting a future first and then another second. So a lot of picks in this package. But one of them is lottery protected, and that would be the future pick several seasons down the road. So you know, I think given the situation where Brady basically gave 4 teams that he would accept a trade to, the ones you can probably guess, there was basically a suggestion that he only was really gunning for the Panthers and had informed the front office that, you know, he was not going anywhere else. And so that limited already your ability to get any sort of true high-end return. That then kind of puts a lot of stress on the Sens to find a partner. And in this case, you know, that partner was already decided. So if you had one option and one team that Tkachuk would go to, and he's already basically quit on the squad itself, there aren't many options for a return that are going to be particularly palatable. And what I think the Sens did with this package was actually pretty good. You got multiple first rounders, you got a pretty good return, and honestly, you can trade those picks to get some other player or maybe a big prospect or something. I don't know what the Sens are going to do with those assets. They were rumored to be into Jason Robertson. Robertson apparently was not as interested in going to the Sens, but maybe that'll change over time. Either way, though, they had to make this deal. It happened, and that basically takes the Panthers out of the Hellebuyck race. If they were not willing to give Lundell over to the Sens for Brady Tkachuk, which that was Ottawa's original ask, there's probably no way they're doing it for Hellebuyck. And honestly, I'm pretty okay with that. I mentioned earlier that Lundell is a good player, but the Panthers allegedly think he's a first-line center. That's probably not the case. I think what they're doing is very much trying to hype him up, artificially inflate his value, and dare somebody to come to the Panthers with an offer that absolutely blows their mind, right? I think, you know, when you look at Lundell's trade value around the league, he is probably disproportionately valued. if he had come to the Jets, I know he would have been our 2C for the foreseeable future. But honestly, you might have been really well off trading him and flipping him to a team that's got a ton of futures, but was looking to make a big ad in this manner. So ultimately, I think it's a little surprising that after everything is said and done, that ended up being the sticking point. But, the Sens could afford to take on more futures. The Jets are trying to get more roster-oriented stuff, and I do think that's going to put them in a bit of a tight position. If you're really struggling to try and fill your team with pieces, maybe you need to rethink your strategy and what you're actually going for here. That said, I did talk about the Buffalo Sabres being, honestly, my favored team in terms of assets and returns. Would I have been thrilled with 9th overall and maybe 25th overall plus some B prospect? Absolutely. But, obviously the Jets don't have that much of an appetite for a massive futures haul. I think they're going to have to rethink some of that, but they're certainly not willing to bend as much as I think some of us had hoped. So all that to say, the Jets ended up not really getting the deal that I think a lot of us expected or wanted. But if you're looking at other teams out there, there are still a fair number of suitors, and it seems like the trade is still going to happen. All of the insiders are now talking about it as if it is in progress. And I think that is a stark change from last week where, a lot of the insiders, whether it was Drager or Pagnota or Friedman, were kind of talking about it as if it was sort of whispered, but not really confirmed. Now, Friedman basically said they were trying to keep a very big lid on it. And remember, I said they were trying to keep a cone of silence around it. They can't anymore. It's obvious that Hellebuyck has submitted his trade request. He's probably given the Jets his list of teams, but there is one wrinkle, right? Tkachuk said he only wanted to go to one team. If the reporting today is correct, Hellebuyck may be willing to play more ball than we'd initially expected. And I want to talk about why I think that's a really important thing. Helly has some incentive to be a little more open-minded about where he plays next. He can't really afford to waste another season in Winnipeg. Obviously, his deal next July 1st, not this upcoming one, but after this year, becomes a 10-team no trade list, I believe, or trade list, something like that. But basically, there's no trade clause that kicks into effect. And so this no movement clause that he has now is probably his best chance to negotiate his future destination with as much freedom as he can. After that, things get more complicated, and I think everyone is keenly aware of that. Hellebuyck also knows that his services are going to be in demand, and there are a lot of teams outside of just the Panthers that are going to be capable of doing this deal. What I think is also a little bit funny is Team USA very much has been trying to get everyone to the Panthers, but only one or two guys can actually make it. So it was always going to be a race to see who could meet Florida's demand first before you ended up watching your players sit on the sidelines of this deal and have to sort out another trade destination. Larkin's picking Dallas. We might see a Werenski trade request at some point. Who knows to where? There are some options out there, but all that to say, Winnipeg has one of the big pieces still left in play. And if the noise that we're hearing continues to just get more and more deafening, we are really about to see one of the biggest trades in Jets franchise history. I want to talk about why and where this is all heading in just a brief little bit. ED is way more common than most guys think, and millions of men deal with it at some point in their lives. HIMS offers a simple, convenient, and discreet way to take care of your health by connecting you with licensed healthcare providers online and giving you access to personalized treatment options from the comfort of your home. No awkward appointments, no pharmacy lines, just a straightforward process designed to make getting care easier. Taking care of yourself shouldn't feel complicated, and HIMS makes the process private and easy to navigate. It's healthcare built around your schedule, your comfort, and your needs. Obviously, having a really nice platform that's discreet and private can make the process a lot less stressful. We know how difficult it is to go to your doctor and have a consultation that's frankly a little bit embarrassing. HIMS makes the process so easy. You can get treatments shipped right to your door, and it's always confidential and convenient. To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, hair loss, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/lockedonnhl. That's hims.com/lockedonnhl for your free online visit. hims.com/lockedonnhl. Prescription required. See website for details and important safety information. Sildenafil is the generic version of Viagra. Viagra is a registered trademark of Viatris, Specialty LLC. HIMS is not affiliated with or endorsed by Viatris. The biggest stage in world soccer is here, and every match feels like it has the potential for a memorable, game breaking moment. One goal can completely change the complexion of a game, shift momentum, and alter the outcome in a single instant. That's what makes tournament soccer so exciting from the opening whistle to the final kick. Now, FanDuel is giving fans another reason to stay locked into every match with every goal pays. Bet on a match and get bonus bets for every goal scored in that match. More goals mean more bonus bets. All you have to do is turn on your token. Obviously, over the next couple of days, we are about to get to one of the busiest parts of the final group stage matches. There's going to be a ton to take a look at and watch. I've personally been rooting for South Korea throughout this tournament, but maybe you've got a surprise contender that you really love. Maybe you've been following Cabo Verde. Maybe you think the DR Congo are going to make a real run against Colombia. No matter what, though, in order to make the most of your opportunities, be sure to download the FanDuel app right now. And you can even benefit from every single goal scored in every match. From the opening whistle to the final kick, let there be goals on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com to get started now. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are chatting a lot about the follow-up from the Connor Hellebuyck fallout. Obviously, the Florida Panther thing this past weekend with Tkachuk was a bit of a blow, I think, for a lot of us. Personally, I had a little bit of a doomer spell just because, given the Jets were apparently after more roster-oriented stuff, which I think has always been the target, I did kind of hope that maybe they would think a little bit more about the future, but the Jets are going to do the Jets. It did put me in a little bit of a tight spot because, I'm thinking, well, okay, if they're trying to get more roster-oriented players, that's going to mean that they're going to try and make some sort of a contention run. And I just don't see how they're ever going to do that. Whatever this Hellebuyck trade is, will get them some decent assets. But this team was one of the lowest scoring offenses and one of the slowest and oldest teams last year. How the heck is one trade going to fix the entire roster? It just can't. And the Jets don't have the assets to do the rest of it. So that kind of put me in a little bit of a dour mood. I won't lie. But, kind of circling back to it and hearing some of the later reports, it seems like things are in an okay spot. The Jets are still humming along with this trade progress and negotiation. And, I did say somebody had to blink first. It was the Panthers this time, just in a different way than I think a lot of us expected. That's okay, though. Like I said, there have always been other suitors, some a little more desirable than others. And when you look at what's on the table, you're looking at a number of teams. Hellebuyck himself, apparently, if the reports are to be believed, is open to other destinations outside of Florida and has been willing to expand his trade list. Now, I think partly there is some selfishness here. He doesn't want to get stuck in Winnipeg for another season. But before you start complaining about it, I don't mean stuck because he hates Winnipeg or whatever. He just doesn't want to spend another competitive season where he has the potential to be really good on a team that's not really headed anywhere. He also probably understands that if he's not there, the Jets are going to start losing games, which might mean that they get a much more helpful draft pick out of this upcoming season. So I think in general, the way that he has handled this process has really been beneficial to everyone. It makes it easier to trade him, which is good for his own personal career and exploits. It also means that the way that he's exiting has been more gracious than I think we've seen from other players. Dylan Larkin kind of threw his team a little bit under the bus with the way that he did his trade request, especially given that he's not really been that good for stretches of his career. Like, don't get me wrong, he's a great player. And I think, him wanting out of Detroit may not be the wrong decision. But by the same token, would you say he's done enough for Detroit to really earn that right? I think it's a little more debatable. Brady Tkachuk, the way that he quit on his team, I thought was really inexcusable, a really poor reflection of his character, and honestly just an embarrassment to, the fans who have supported him for so many years. I feel like Brady, listen, obviously you can get pouty, you can be upset about the direction of your team, but the way that he quit on his team, especially heading into the playoffs and post-Olympics, was just, to me, that is a huge red flag. And it makes you just really wish him ill. You don't want him to succeed or find success on this Panthers squad. In fact, you really hope that he never wins a Stanley Cup for the rest of his career. That is how in my opinion, insulting his exit from Ottawa was. And I think where all of this is headed is, it's kind of making a lot of the American players look a little entitled in some ways. Now, I think in Hellebuyck's case, I don't quite feel that way. I think he's been a really good steward for this team, a really good ambassador. He's, for many years, kept his opinions to himself for the most part. And I think he has really elevated this team above where it could have been for many seasons. You can argue about his playoff track record. I think that doesn't hold nearly as much weight given what we've said about the Jets' playoff roster in general. He certainly bears some responsibility in that, don't get me wrong, but the team itself has not really been competitive since the 17-18 season. That is the gold standard. It's the one everyone will always compare it to. Unfortunately, that's what we've got. And having seen that team and where the Jets have been the last several years, you just know that there's been a gulf in quality. So I think he's handled this process really well. And it also leads us to see that there are some really good contenders. I think the Buffalo Sabres are the next favored destination. They've got a big goaltending question. After they lost, they were immediately linked to Hellebuyck by some Buffalo Sabres media folks, which makes me wonder, were the Sabres already thinking about Hellebuyck before? And now that they have a clear need in net, what will they pay up to do that? Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro were talking a little bit on a podcast earlier this afternoon about this potential landing spot. And Ray kind of referenced a young center from Buffalo being part of this return, which fits where the Jets were trying to go with Lundell. Well, young center, guess who meets that requirement? It'd be Helenius. Now, if you ask Sabres fans, they're going to tell you Helenius is nowhere near worth Hellebuyck. He's too good. He's, a future first-line center. Hellebuyck isn't even in the same stratosphere, yada, yada, yada. Very funny when Hellebuyck has multiple Vezinas, a Hart Trophy, a Jennings Trophy, and is an Olympic gold medalist. He was single-handedly the reason that Team USA won gold in the game against one of the greatest Canadian lineups ever assembled. But yeah, tell me how he's not worth a top young prospect. That said, I get it. We all sort of overvalue and overrate our players, and goalies traditionally don't go for as much. But I do think in this particular case, the Sabres do have the assets to make a serious play. And if the Jets kind of put them to the fire a bit, Jarmo is willing to pay up. I think he's shown that he will swing. Just think about that Logan Stanley trade and Shen trade. The Jets got a pretty good return out of that. I wasn't sure what to expect, given we heard a lot of rumors about who was into Logan and who wasn't, and the Jets wanting to potentially keep him. But Jarmo ended up giving the Jets an offer they just couldn't refuse. And I wonder if that's going to be the same case here, because Utah and Montreal have the assets to also be in play here. Utah especially has a ton of young futures and prospects. They've got big picks. They've got young players. They have toys to throw at the Jets that would be very shiny and very good for Winnipeg's future. They have a team that is, young, talented, and has an excess of assets to throw at a major splash. And frankly, they do need a goalie. Karel Vejmelka, decent, but not that great. And he'd probably be coming back in this deal, which is sort of funny considering he only seems to ever do well against the Jets specifically. Now he might end up playing for Winnipeg. So go figure, right? But Hellebuyck in Utah, it is interesting. Will Chevy be willing to trade him to a division rival? I think that's kind of an open-ended question. I think it's, I think it's fair enough that, typically you don't see a lot of teams do this. But in Winnipeg's case, I think if the return is right, they might be willing to be a little more cutthroat, especially because they have to get this sorted out before the summer ends. They can't really let this go into next season. The longer the situation percolates and starts to run on, the worse the return is likely to be for Winnipeg. Montreal, apparently some agent reached out and told Friedman or Dreger or one of those other folks that his player had added Montreal to their trade list. And given the situation and what we just heard about Hellebuyck expanding his list, kind of makes sense that it might be Helly. If he were to go to Montreal, again, another team replete with young assets and resources, a pretty bright future, and kind of like the Sabres would give Helly multiple runs at a cup. The Panthers are kind of towards the tail end of their core and might only have a couple of runs left in them, whereas all of these other teams are generally younger and might have a bigger horizon where if Hellebuyck plays 3 to 4 really good seasons going ahead, he might get a ton of cracks at the Stanley Cup. So, all that to say, he might honestly be better served going to one of these younger rosters. I'd be thinking long and hard about that heading into, the twilight of his career, where he's still putting up pretty great numbers, but there's no promise that it's going to continue to be that way for forever. So I think the Jets are still in a pretty good position, but it is dependent on what the Jets pro scouts tell Chevy they want and what Winnipeg is trying to accomplish here competitively. I think the one thing I would worry about when it comes to a team like, say, the Sabres, is if Ryan McLeod is part of the package, and that is one of the centerpieces. McLeod in isolation would have been great like 2 seasons ago. Where the Jets are now, I just don't think he really fits what the timeline should be and what the Jets frankly need. Winnipeg will disagree, but they need to get younger and kind of move away from competitive assets. If you try to do the halfway house thing, it's not going to work. The Jets are going to put themselves in a position where they're just kicking the can down the road, and eventually it is going to bite them in the butt. It has done so right now, and we've seen that bill come due, and if they try to do it again, it's going to be a serious problem. I respect why the Jets feel they have to do this, but I think if you are trying to do that, you're lying about where the team really is and what is coming in the future. But ultimately, the Jets are going to have to sort this out for themselves. They've got some big choices to make, and I want to talk about bracing yourself for whatever this week, because we may come away from all of this not really being happy with the trade return. I'll talk about all of that coming right up. If you've got a sweet tooth, you know how tough it is to find the perfect treat without all the sugar. That's why Fruity Rainbow 5-Hour Energy Shots bring that nostalgic flavor back in a whole new way. Fruity Rainbow 5-Hour Energy Shots treat your taste buds to an explosion of flavor with a tasty caffeine kick. It's a quick, easy way to satisfy that sweet craving while keeping things simple and on the go. Obviously, as a powerlifter type, I love to do heavy weights, and caffeine is honestly one of the nicest natural stimulants, but a lot of caffeinated beverages come with a ton of sugar. 5-Hour Energy does that without any of the sugar and the crash. It's great. It's good for you. And of course, it comes in a portable form factor that's great for on-the-go lifting. Or if you're in the office and you're just trying to resist that 3 p.m. slump, 5-Hour Energy can be there for you too. It's sweet, it's got a great flavor, and it has the caffeine to keep you going throughout the rest of your day. Get candy-flavored chaos with Fruity Rainbow 5-Hour Energy Shots, available online at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for rejoining us on tonight's episode. We are just wrapping up really quickly with talking about being prepared for whatever this week. The next few days are going to be hectic. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to be offline for most of the day, so if the Jets end up trading Hellebuyck at some point earlier in the day, that's going to irritate me very slightly. But yeah, we'll have to see what the return is. And I want to say that you probably need to prepare yourself for a lot of scenarios, because there's a decent chance that this return is not going to be what I think some of us were hoping for. I'm very much of the mindset that the Jets need to really acquire big futures. The Jets don't agree. They look at this as a scenario where they can retool on the fly, which I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, like, how exactly do you do that? You need a lot of assets to retool on the fly, and the Jets don't have them. You also need some guarantee that the kids you've got are decent. You need guarantees that the star players on your team are going to repeat their past season success, and you're going to do it without your reigning Vezina, contending goalie who had a single down season in like the last 8 or 9. Seems like a tall order. I sit there and I'm like, I don't think you're really going to get the return that turns your squad into some sort of a contender. I think if the Jets seriously believe that, they're deluding themselves. But I would suspect that deep down, they probably do know whatever they're going to get in return is going to be more for the future. I don't think they can afford to try and sit this one along that fence where you try to do the halfway house thing. Again, I think that just puts the Jets in a very mediocre territory. I don't really ever try to advocate for lots of firings, but, at this point, the front office needs to kind of poop or get off the pot. And, Chipman has done a great job of getting this franchise back. But if the Jets leadership can't figure out where this team is headed in the grand scheme of the NHL and adapt to that, then they're not going to ever be successful again. And I think that's a serious concern. Do I think that's going to be the case? No. I think the Jets are going to figure it out over the next couple of seasons. It might take some harder lessons, but this year should have been the first big one that the way that they've tried to do things is wrong. They're apparently talking to Doan, I guess. We'll see if that actually goes anywhere. Doan coming in to do youth development would be a sign that they are very, understanding of the pipeline being a problem, and they're trying to fix that. Good. Now comes, maybe some of the scouting, right? Whether it's amateur scouting or the pro scouting, both of these departments have had some swings and some misses. I think the pro scouting in particular has been just abysmal in my mind. The players the Jets have traded for that are active NHLers for the most part, a lot of them really don't pass muster. There have been some additions I like, but for the most part, over the past several years, can't really say I've been overly impressed. And they never seem to take swings on reclamation projects that have gone on to other teams and done really well. That is definitely a gap where the Jets could have exploited market inefficiencies, and they didn't. Some of those guys don't even have trade protection, so why not see what the teams are asking for and swing? If you're serious about competing, you've got to do things differently than everyone else, because the Jets are a small market. They're not in a position where they can just attract talent freely, and yet they keep going back to some wells that haven't been that successful. And on top of that, you've got some locker room issues. Sean Reynolds was on the Top Line podcast talking about Scheifele and the way that he wants to play with only a handful of guys, and that hamstrings the entire rest of your top nine. That's not really what a player like him should be doing. The Jets can't afford to have a guy who's very good, but who's not McDavid, running the show. The team needs to be flexible and willing to change, because every other team in the NHL does. Like, every other team in the NHL does. Even McDavid doesn't always get to pick his line mates. So I just think there are so many things that the Jets have to sort through here, and this Hellebuyck trade needs to be the biggest win they've had in a long time. If they come away with a mediocre return, I think a lot of us are just going to feel checked out. This trade has probably been brewing for a while, and I'm sure that the Olympics just kind of kickstarted it and put it into top gear. But Winnipeg has to do well on this. If they screw this trade up, they potentially set their franchise back years. And I don't say that as just a little bit of hyperbolic speech. I'm dead serious. This trade has to be part of their foundational core for the future. And if the Jets go the other direction, all I can say is good luck. If you keep trying to play this middle-of-the-road approach, you are not going to go anywhere. Everyone else is swinging big and acquiring big assets. The Jets trying to play that minnow in the pool, they're not going to succeed. They might be able to keep up with some revenue and stuff, but ultimately the Jets need to think long and hard about why their approach the last several years got away from what made them so successful. And if they can hit this Hellebuyck trade out of the park, that is a great start to their future, but they cannot mess this up. Would love to hear your thoughts, though. Are you confident that the Jets are going to get this assignment right, or do you worry that they are going to try and do the same old, and put themselves in a tighter spot? Let me know in the YouTube comments below, or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.